everyone. Welcome to Art School Live. I am 𝙂𝙤𝙠𝙚, and just turning off all of my sounds here because lots of dings. Eric is still on vacation in China and talking to all the different museums and organizations about plein air painting. So he's having a wonderful time there. And I get to have a wonderful time hosting our Art School Live show, which is such a fantastic opportunity. And I'm really excited for today's guests. You guys know that I'm normally a pastel painter, but I've been dabbling in gouache and I absolutely love it. So we have another gouache artist with us today, and I love his work. He does a lot of cityscapes and landscapes. And if you don't know him, you definitely need to. This is Danny Folkman's artwork. He is in LA, and I'm super excited for him to join us today. So let's bring in Danny.
Hi,
Danny. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And you guys also are, I don't know if you know this yet, but Danny's actually going to be on our faculty for Gouache Live coming up in August, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the show. Danny, what are you going to be sharing with us today?
So I wanted to focus on how to make gouache glow. And what I mean by that is really just how to paint believable lights in a nocturne scene. Of course, we're always trying to paint believable light in any painting, but it can be particularly tough with gouache, I think, because of the way gouache dries.
Mm-hmm.
The lights tend to dry darker and darks dry lighter. So it takes a little bit of getting used to figure out how to lay down light, especially in a darker scene. A lot of times I've seen people try to go in real thick with the paint at the end to put down highlights, and it doesn't always work just because of the way that gouache dries. So I'll just be sharing my technique for how I approach these nocturnes to make them to make the lights glow the way they do.
I'm excited, looking forward to this. I've never actually tried a nocturne painting before in any medium.
Never?
So never. This will be fun. It's a new thing. I love learning.
Oh yeah.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and we're going to get this show started.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes. Now, here's your host, Eric Rhodes.
𝙂𝙤𝙠𝙚. Welcome to Art School Live. If you're just joining us, I'm filling in for Eric this week, and he's still traveling in China. And we also have our producer 𝙈𝙤𝙪𝙖𝙘𝙝 on vacation. She is enjoying some nice sunny beach weather. So just me here today. Hopefully I don't screw things up too badly. We've got Danny Folkman with us today. He's an LA-based artist working in gouache, and he is going to show us how he makes lights glow in a nocturne scene, which I'm super excited for. So let's go ahead and take it away, Danny.
All right. Is this square? Everything look good here?
Everything looks great.
Okay, perfect.
And I've got your reference image up on the screen.
Lovely. All right. So this is a scene from the Hollywood Hills. I like to do a lot of these, just walking around the hills and finding these little shots that have a street light. Oh, I'm pointing to my picture in real life, but you can't see it, obviously. This is in the hills just up behind the Chateau Marmont, if anybody's familiar. So to begin here, really the key to what we're doing here is preserving a warm underpainting to give the impression of glowing lights.
Okay, I've got two questions for you to start with.
Let's start.
Number one is, what surface are you using? Is that watercolor paper?
Okay, yes. So yeah, let's talk about that first. This is just watercolor paper, 300-pound watercolor paper. It doesn't typically warp. If I'm not using 300-pound paper, usually this is what I use in the studio. And recently I've been moving more towards using panels on location. So this is just regular watercolor paper, 300-pound. And then, so this is my palette.
Ooh,
we're working with.
This
is pretty standard. Usually what I'll do is I limit the palette based off of what I see. So I try to only squeeze out the colors that I think are necessary. Typically that's lemon yellow, raw sienna, alizarin crimson, ultramarine, Prussian blue is a newer addition. Windsor green sometimes. Windsor green is, I'm sure you know, Windsor green can be a mess. It can be a big problem.
I actually don't know. Being a pastel artist, I just pick up sticks of color that I like. So learning and everything is all new to me.
The Windsor green, at least with the gouache, it just gets into everything. It's a lot like phthalo blue. Like if you use a tiny little speck of it, it tends to get everywhere.
Hmm.
So I hesitate to include that, but with a nighttime scene, it's the darkest color that I have that's not black. I don't like to use black because it muddies everything.
Yeah.
Um, and then for this particular scene, opera pink and turquoise light.
I love those colors.
They're awesome. I've tried to stay away from them more recently, only because I noticed that all of my paintings were getting very purple and pink because I just would mix these two. Like for a while, I stopped using ultramarine and I wasn't using Prussian either, and these just make a wild pink
Yeah.
purple, which looks awesome for especially for nocturnes. And I have to include them here because there's really it's not gonna. If I don't, then it just reads too dull. If you
Yeah.
wanted to go more realistic, you could get away with just Prussian ultramarine and alizarin, but as soon as you put the opera pink and the turquoise in there, everything just pops. And I tend to push the color in my paintings. I make everything a lot more saturated than it probably should be.
But that's what makes them stand out. That's why I like them.
Thank you. Did I ride into your other question, or was there
Yep,
another
you did.
question
And
there?
actually, there was another question. So, what's the reason? So, why do you pre-spray your paper? Yesterday, our artist didn't spray her paper. So, I'm just curious why you approach it that way.
I always spray the paper first because my first layer is always a very wet, transparent layer
Okay.
of paint. So if you spray it first, otherwise, I mean, you can get the brush as wet as you'd like. The paint just doesn't run
Right.
as well if the paper itself isn't sprayed. I can even spray it more here. Like I just like it to be completely runny for the first few layers because I don't want to cover up the white of the page. I'd like the white of the page to show through because that's what's going to give us the glowing effect that I'm talking about. So here, I always start with a warm underpainting because a lot of times, especially with gouache, once you start adding white in later stages, everything gets very cool. So I like to start with a warm painting or a warm underpainting because it keeps everything warm. I like the look of having this color showing throughout the entire image. It kind of ties everything together nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And with a nocturne, I always do alizarin crimson. This is raw sienna and alizarin crimson. It makes everything look kind of rosy and warm and sort of nostalgic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I do that. I always use alizarin for a nocturne, and then during the day I just use raw sienna or burnt sienna. The reason I'm painting it like this, obviously, this is where our light's going to be.
Right.
On my side, it's showing up in reverse. I hope it's the right way around for everybody who's watching.
Yeah, it's showing up right.
Okay, great. So yeah, I want to preserve the most important part about what I want to show today is preserving this underpainting because that's what's going to make things glow. So I'm going to cut into that yellow just a little bit more, and that's pretty much as far as I'm going to go with that. Most of this color right around here is going to stay, and then some of this into the street here. And this is all super, super wet and washy, that you can see how wet the paint is. If the glare gets too bad, I have a light overhead that I can adjust to fix that. So I always cover the page with a warm tone. Also, it gets rid of just the pure white of the page. If
Right.
you're doing something where, if there's a white highlight that you want to preserve, like actually I might even take out a little bit of the paint right around where the light will be, just to have a highlight in there, like right here maybe. That stays nice and light. During the day, there's been times when if there's a highlight on like a bright white car or something, then you can try to preserve that because with gouache, you're not going to be able to get the vibrancy with thicker paint later on. So, and the interesting thing with nocturnes is you're kind of in a way, you're kind of painting everything in reverse. Because you can't just, I don't like just the look of layering it as you typically would with a daytime scene. So now I'm dropping in a loose sketch. Sorry, I'm talking over you. What'd you say?
Sorry, I was talking over you. What size are you working in?
This is 6x9.
Okay.
6x9 is, that's become my standard like plein air size. 6x9. I'm sorry.
Because it's quick.
It's quick, and I like that it's slightly like for a while I was doing 6x8s, but this is just a little bit wider, and I found that I like a wider view.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, 6x9 and then 7x10 has been a recent favorite of mine. So with the drawing should take, most of the time I'm doing this plein air. The drawing I don't think should take more than about 10 minutes at the most, but even that can be pushing it. It should just be quick and sketchy and just give you the idea of what's going on. It doesn't need to be exact unless there's something like a car, I like to try and draw that out so that that's in there properly. And then another thing I'm going to do, this is like a compositional thing. This isn't really related to what I'm talking about, but this tree, I don't like the fact that it slants in to the right. Every other vertical line in the image slants slightly left, the palm trees and then those two telephone poles. So I'm going to change that tree and just make it go to the left as well, because I like that way, like all of these lines that I'll put in will be slanting slightly toward the left, and it just looks cool that way. There's our telephone pole, and we can suggest these palm trees back here, and then the lamppost itself will be slanted slightly. Also, by painting everything sort of slanted, and like this road, I edited the picture a little bit so that it's just slightly tilted because it's not quite as dramatic of a hill in real life, but I like making it look more dramatic because it gives the impression of movement, as we get down around that corner there. And also I'm using, this is just also alizarin crimson for the drawing itself. I always use the color, whatever the color is of my underpainting, that I use the same color for the drawing so that it shows through. If it's in a little while here, I'll go a little darker and I might use a bit of Prussian blue to draw, but I always keep the same color because a lot of this will show through. And part of that's stylistic. I just like the look of having some of that broken color underneath.
Right.
I can't believe you've never done a nocturne.
I know. It's always been too scary.
They are very scary. Yeah,
I'm
the first time you do them.
I consider myself a still relatively new painter. I mean, I've been painting all my life, but like actually pursuing it and trying to learn, it's only been a couple of years. So I'm just, I got to get out of my comfort zone a little bit more.
As soon as you start doing it, I think you'll realize that they're not as scary as they seem.
I'm sure. And I've only done gouache plein air once, and it was a terrible experience because I didn't know. I had these little canvas because I didn't know what surface to use. And so I had these little teeny tiny canvas panels, and I was like, oh, this will be fine. But I didn't realize how much it would soak everything up. So everything dried like almost immediately. And I was just like, this is awful.
Were you using like a cold press panel?
I don't even know. It was just like some kind of canvas panel someone had given me. And I was just like, oh, we'll give this a try. And it was definitely not the thing to use.
Oh, this wasn't even a surface that was like meant for watercolor or gouache. This was just a regular canvas. Oh yeah.
I had no idea what I should be using. So now I've, all these artists I've had on Art School Live, I'm learning all these little tips and tricks and things that I need to do. So I just need to get out again and try again.
My favorite surfaces are the watercolor panels, like a cold press watercolor panel. Now they have aluminum ones.
Oh, someone just gave me one of those to try.
They're awesome. I mean, it's pretty much the same surface that you're painting on. It's just that it's aluminum, so it's a little bit lighter, and I think they're a little cheaper than some of the others I've seen. But they're great. What I'm doing now, everybody argues like, do you work dark to light or light to dark or from the focal point out or whatever. I always work dark to light, even in a nocturne, because like we were talking about with the highlights, the way that gouache dries, lighter colors dry darker, darker colors dry lighter. Darks read the best when they're painted transparently with gouache. What's that?
Why is that?
Because the when you paint thicker, it dries, it dries matte and it gets chalky. So when you paint a dark, especially like in this situation where I have a warm underpainting, it just reads much darker than once you put the thick paint on top, it covers everything and it just becomes this matte, chalky surface. And maybe it's reflecting more light off the surface, and so it doesn't look nearly as dark as when you first paint it or something. I really don't know the technical side of it. I just have realized that the transparents look much darker, and so that's my entire process has become, painting up from a transparent layer, but preserving it, because the darkest darks and the lightest lights, you're not going to be able to paint with the thicker stuff later on.
So the only paintings I've done like to completion, I've done some animal portraits, which I really enjoy doing. I did those on canvas, but I not knowing how because it dries so differently, the light's drying darker, the dark's drying lighter. I ended up adding so much more paint to the canvas because I couldn't get it right. So I would just add some more, change some more.
Exactly.
So this idea of approaching it in more of a thinner watercolory kind of way and building up to it, I think is a really fantastic way to do this.
Yeah, that's because that's the thing with gouache too. Everybody that I've seen, they either, well, not everybody I've seen, but a lot of the people that I've painted with gouache, you're either doing it, treating it just like watercolor, and it's too transparent, or they're painting too thick with it, and it looks like oils. That actually can work better, or they're treating it like oils rather. And both can work, but I think the sweet spot is just somewhere in the center. So that's why I build
Which
up
is
from
the area that I need to try to get to, because I definitely go both ways. And I noticed too, like on some of the ones that I've done and have been hanging on the wall for a while, like the paint is starting to crack a little bit because I use too much. So just trying to, the sweet spot, got to find it.
It just takes, and that's another thing too. Like I taught my first workshop just a few months ago, and everybody is always asking how do you find that perfect consistency with the water to lay the paint down a certain way. And I don't have a good answer for that, other than you just need to experiment and and figure it out.
You gotta,
it's the what?
It's the brush miles. You gotta put in the work and actually
exactly.
And
so I'm just dropping in my darkest areas here. Some of them are going to get painted over.
So you just sprayed this again. Do you always do like wet into wet? Is your surface always wet, or do you let it dry in between?
It's pretty much always wet up until maybe about halfway or 3/4 through the painting.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk more about that as
as
we get closer to that. This is bleeding a little bit, but that's okay because I'm going to go over that later on. So I like these early stages. I like to keep it runny because it'll make a little more sense later on once we start adding the thick paint. Why I like the look of it, because you get this really interesting effect. And when I did this yesterday, it happens right around here, around the light itself, and then around this house here. You'll see what I'm talking about later. It kind of, if you preserve these washy layers, And then depending on how you lay the paint thick on top of it, it literally looks like it can glow. I'm so tempted to show you exactly what I'm talking about because I have a painting right next to me that has it, but we're just going to wait and you can see when it comes together.
We'll get the surprise at the end.
Yeah. Because it works during the day too. Like this isn't just a nocturne technique. I was painting something the other day, a house that had this bright yellow awning. And what drew me to it was how bright this awning was. This is the telephone pole I'm putting in now. And it just, like that yellow light was bouncing off of everything around it. And so if you paint it transparently like this, and you literally let the yellow paint just bleed into everything around it, and then go in with the thicker stuff later on and leave that yellow, it tricks your eye to make it look like it's literally glowing.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool when it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out because even if I spend all the time in the world building up transparently and trying to keep this, like carefully keep this all intact, sometimes once you start throwing the thick paint around, it is fun, and you can get carried away and
Yeah.
you lose it. But it is fun later on. Like once I'm done with this transparent layer, we'll start putting some thicker paint down, and I love. That's what I love about gouache is it's got the best of both worlds, between watercolor and then you can treat it more like oils too. It's awesome. And then combine that with the fact that it dries so quickly, it's so easy to travel with.
Right.
I just started painting with oils.
I started playing with it because it's so hard to travel with pastels sometimes. So that's part of the reason I wanted to try gouache. Yeah,
it's travels so much easier. I only just started painting with oils recently. Oh, I screwed up this shape. It's okay. It doesn't really matter. I only just started painting with oils, but I still, every time I go out to paint plein air, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll take the oils out. But it just seems like such a hassle because I haven't got my my system down for painting plein air with oils. Like I know there's, if I work on it, I can condense everything to just a backpack and I'll figure it out, but I haven't.
Eric actually did a video, I think it was in May on Art School Live, about packing his backpack because he does oils and what he includes in his, and just trying to get it all down to one backpack.
Who did this video?
Eric.
Eric.
Yeah. Because he always, until he just recently started using gouache and watercolor for traveling, but he paints plein air oil all the time.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to watch that because I haven't figured it out. Even my gouache backpack is still like, I really don't carry all that much. It's actually the same exact setup that I use in the studio at home as I take plein air. Everything's exactly the same.
When you do plein air, do you so I know some artists will paint upright, others will have their paper flat. Which one do you prefer?
Upright.
When you're upright, when you're plein air?
100% upright. I used to paint flat because I used to do a lot of pen and ink drawing. So it was always flat on a desk, and that's what I got used to. And it's actually kind of a funny story. When I was in high school, my teacher wanted me to start painting, and I didn't want to do it because I was just being stubborn. I had always done pen and ink, and I got really good at it. I used to just do these pen and ink like architectural drawings, and he saw my work and was like, "You need to start painting." And I didn't want to do it, and so he assigned this was AP Studio Art, like junior year or something, and he assigned us a still life, and I was like, I'll draw it. Like he wanted us to, paint it, set up an easel and paint it. And I was like, no, I'll draw it with the pen and ink, like, because that's what I do. And he was like, no, you're going to paint it like everybody else is. I'm like, no, it's okay. I'll do it from over here, from at my desk, and I'll do it with the pen and ink. He's like, no, you're not. You're going to come paint it. Like, who do you think you are?
Right.
I was the worst. And I like fought him over this. I was being so stubborn. And then I was finally like, okay, I'll paint, but I'm painting flat on my desk. He's like, absolutely not. You're going to come and set up an easel and paint with everybody else. And I finally did. And that's of course, you know, it changed everything. I was like, well, this
Yeah.
is obviously much better. Like I was just, it's so much better to paint upright. Like even now, like, you know, we were talking about having the palette showing earlier, and
Yeah.
I didn't want to change it because I haven't painted flat in like years. So I have to have it upright.
I'm gonna have to try that. That's what I heard from somebody else too, because I've always done the gouache just flat on my table.
Oh, really?
Interesting your mentality with that, because that's my son right now. He's 14 and he loves to draw, and he will exclusively draw and colored pencil, and that's it. I've tried to get him to try. I showed him, I'm like, man, these guys are doing all of these cool like anime and comic book paintings in watercolor and gouache. You got to try this. And he's like, no, I just want to draw. I'm like, okay, fine. Be that way.
That was my mindset for a long time. I didn't want anything to do with color because I was just using black and white pen and ink. And I was like, oh my God, that just sounds like way more than I need to deal with. And I've, you know, I've gotten comfortable with the just the black and white. I didn't want to do it. And handling paint, you know, it takes a long time to figure out just how to handle paint when you're coming from something like ink that's just exactly as you put it down.
Right.
That's what it looks like.
Well, and all the coloring and everything that goes into it, that's been the biggest challenge for me, is like, okay, that's the color I need. How do I get that color?
Exactly. So that's the other interesting thing with gouache, like the way that I'm painting this right now. Is this glare too much?
No, it's fine.
Okay. When I'm painting a scene like this, in a second, I'm going to drop in all the other colors with the thicker paint, and the whole thing will come together. When I'm painting like this, a scene like this, you kind of have to think. I mean, as with any plein air painting, you're thinking like you have to think like 10 steps ahead. You know, it's like, okay, I'm starting with red, but the colors that I'm seeing aren't obviously aren't nearly this warm. So how are you getting there? And with gouache and with watercolor too, like you have to take that into consideration, how transparent you're painting and how much color is going to show through. And that's another thing, is just takes time to figure out, you know, to get the consistency right.
So with your brushes, do you prefer, we were talking about this yesterday, do you prefer watercolor brushes or more of an acrylic brush? Because they don't have like just gouache brushes.
Right. I've actually never even thought about using an acrylic brush for gouache. I always use watercolor brushes.
See, and I always like immediately was like, this is paint and it's not watercolor, so I guess I must use an acrylic paintbrush.
That's interesting. It's not too. I'm curious to try that. I've literally never thought of that. You don't like it?
I don't like it. Well, and I think part of it is because it doesn't soak up enough water. So it's, when I put stuff down, it's very, very thick on the paper. And so then I end up having to add water to the paper and it just is not, I've not figured out brush handling and any of that stuff. But so I want to try more with the watercolor brush, because I've never approached gouache in this style where it's really watery before and doing multiple layers. I've always just been like, gouache has to be thick and you got to cover everything and it's all opaque. So now I'm curious. I've got to try it in this fashion.
Oh yeah, that's immediately what I thought with the acrylic brush, is that you're not being able to soak up enough paint. It could work, I guess, if you're strictly painting thick. I've never tried it.
Yeah.
I always use watercolor brushes, and I
do
only
you use
use
a big brush.
Sorry.
Do you always use a big brush?
Yeah, this is a 3/4 inch. This is like my workhorse brush. Everything gets painted with this, except the drawing is like a 1/4 inch. I think this is like a 1/4 inch round, or whatever. I honestly don't even know all the brush names. I have like 3 or 4 brushes that I've used for years, and I've never.
That one looks
expanded.
like a filbert.
Filbert. Yeah.
Yes, because it's got the rounded edges. And what I've heard is all flats turn into filberts eventually because they just wear away on the edges.
Yeah, this is a newer one, but it's already starting to get some rounded edges. I had to get new ones recently because I left them on the back of my car one day up on Mall and Drive and drove away. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I really don't know for certain. I just went out to paint the next day and didn't have my brushes, and the only thing I can think of was I was painting, off the back of my car the day before. I had to have just left them on the back of my car, and they fell off. And I even retraced my steps. I drove all the way back up there and was like looking around because I'm like, who's going to take a pack of brushes? But they weren't there.
That's always a bummer.
And yeah, I always paint with this 3/4 inch flat because for as much of the painting as I can, because it keeps you from getting lost in all the little details that just aren't necessary to be dropped in until later on. This paint is a little bit thicker now, still not totally thick, but you see we get some runny stuff, and then right on the edge it's kind of, there's a bit of a dry brush effect. I don't have a good way of explaining this yet. It's just
that's just your technique.
Feeling it out.
And
I use my finger a lot too, to smudge stuff away.
Does that help you with softening the edges too?
Yeah, totally. It softens the edge. It also lifts up the paint a little bit, just kind of, and that way you can kind of stain the image, because when you run your finger across it, then you lift the paint up and you can see that underpainting.
Yeah.
Because I want this street to stay warm. Like, this is pretty much probably how I'm going to leave the street, just as it is right now. And I will use the same thick brush pretty much all the way through the end, because just a couple quick strokes like that. The thing is, I'm never going for, I like a painterly look. So I'm never going for real life. I used to try and paint it exactly as I saw it, because with the pen and ink, when I was doing more illustration stuff, it's like you're drawing exactly what you're looking at.
Right.
And more recently, like in the past year or so, I've really started loosening up and just trying to use as little brush strokes as possible to suggest what you're seeing, which is something that I learned mostly from Mark Boges first, but he learned it from Richard Schmidt, and he paints that way.
We've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to move to the back here and start dropping in the background. Again, the glow that I'm talking about is everything that you're seeing here. You can already kind of see how it looks. Maybe I have something I can hold up against the window so you can see without that glare.
I actually don't see a glare.
Okay, good. On my end, it looks a little more glary, but you can already see that warm light coming together. So I'm going to drop the background in now, and I'm moving to thick paint, very thick, because I want a dry brush effect. The way that I'm going to suggest those city lights off in the distance is with a super, super dry brush. So I'm not mixing any water into this. I'm doing turquoise, a little bit of ultramarine, and then we'll take opera pink, because it just makes the coolest purple.
It really does.
It's awesome. And I've also edited that picture a little bit to bring it out a little bit more. So that's another thing. Once I mix this, we'll talk about working from iPhone photos, because it's just awful. But the way I'm going to suggest these city lights is by using a dry brush and letting some of this, underpainting show through. So if I've mixed this correctly, this should be very broken. Yep. And I'm just going to do a few streaks across here. And leaving all of that, all that noise in there. And that's not the final layer. We'll come in with the colors of the lights themselves later, but this kind of just suggests like those pink and orange lights that are out there. Maybe a little bit behind this tree back here. The sky is going to get a little thicker, or not thicker, a little more wet, because for the sky, I want to cover up the underpainting completely. Maybe a couple spots where it pokes through, but for this dry brush effect to work for the street, for these distant lights, then the sky has to be completely flat.
Sure.
With that purple color. So what I was going to say about the iPhone working from photos that I've realized is part of the reason why I started doing this, the warm underpaintings, is because the iPhone camera a lot of the time, this is pretty wet, if you can see, but thick enough so that it's not going to dry transparently.
Okay.
The iPhone camera during the day tends to make everything blue. It blues everything out, and it does a terrible job of picking up reds and pinks. So that's part of the reason why I started using a warm underpainting, because you lose all those warm colors during the day, and then at night, if you try to take a picture, like in the original photo of that reference image we're looking at, everything looks like super orange and yellow for some reason. That's what the phone likes to do at night. And of course you can edit it and fix it, but you have to know. This is why painting plein air obviously is the best, because then you can see what the actual colors are, so that when you go to paint for photos, you know it's not actually how it looks. But in real life, the colors were a lot more pink and blue at night than what the phone picks up. And I'm preserving the. Sorry?
I said the phones always lie.
It's terrible. Preserving the telephone pole there, the dark, because that's like, we'd be able to paint that darker, but see how it's got that warm like glow to it. I want that to stay, so painting around that. Same with the palm trees. Even though they're a little more blue, they're back in the atmosphere more, and I'm gonna go with blue over top of them. But the bottoms of them, there's a street light right out about here that I'm gonna paint, and that light's kind of hitting the bottom of them. Even if you can't see it all that well in the photo, I would like to emphasize that.
Yeah.
And then another thing to keep in mind when you're painting nocturnes is, like, I did one the other day of a street view, and there was one main street light like this, and then there was like a whole ton of them way off in the distance, and then there's lights in the houses, and way out there, way off in the distance was just way too busy. Like kind of down here in this area on our reference photo, you can see there's the street light that's here that's reflecting off this house, and then I think that might even be camera glare, that like green light there that's happening. And then there's some lights back here behind the trees. I'm not going to paint any of that because it's too much. It's too much information. I want to focus everything on this light and the one that's right out here to kind of lead you off towards the city here. And then the other thing is, I'm going to drop in the highlight on our light right now, which is just lemon yellow and white. I find that lemon yellow is the best yellow to mix with white to get warm highlights. Any other yellow, it doesn't get quite as bright. It's a little muddy. A little bit of opera pink to make it sort of orange.
Maria asks, have you ever tried black watercolor paper for your nocturnes?
I've only done it, no, not for a nocturne. See how that already looks like a glowing light. I've only done it one time. I did actually like a figure. It was like a guitarist at a show playing, and it's like at a concert, so there's all this crazy lighting. So I did that on a black piece of paper. I did just get a black aluminum panel. Those panels we were talking about earlier, I found one of them, and I have yet to try it, but I'm going to. I don't know how much I'll like it. I haven't tried it, so I can't speak on it much yet.
I think it would be really hard, since you try to bring that warm tone to your surface.
Exactly.
That would be a lot harder to do with the black paper.
Exactly. That's my main concern, because I think it might just look kind of flat.
Yeah.
And sort of dull.
I've tried it with
So
pastel and it makes those colors pop, obviously, but then it, like the part that's still black in the shadows, it definitely does look a little more dull.
it just looks
It
dull,
doesn't look
yeah.
natural.
No, no. Now I'm gonna move on to that house. The house on the right there that's reflecting some of that street light. I've got lemon yellow, a little bit of opera pink, and a little bit of raw sienna here. And I'm going super thick because I want to suggest the light on the side of that house right here. I'm just going to leave that exactly as that is. And then onto the side. This is super, super thick paint now. Let's see. So about halfway through is when I transition to the thick stuff. And then by painting this way too, by having, you know, a layer of transparent paint and then having the thicker stuff on top, the whole painting just looks, it looks more dynamic. It gives it
Yeah.
some life. It doesn't look, you know, the watercolor. If you paint it more like watercolor, the whole thing could look flat. If you paint it too thick, the whole thing looks flat. So if you find the sweet spot, I think that's where it's at. I'm going to try to suggest some of the leaves on the trees there. Down in here. Super, super dry. The other thing is, you know, you want to think about the texture. So dry brush for the leaves. Into here. And then as we get further away from the light going up the tree into those leaves, it gets warmer.
Mm-hmm.
And not so bright green. This is a look that I really, really love, is having all this washy transparent gouache and then dropping in the thicker stuff on top. It just looks so cool. Suggest some of those leaves back there. And then as we get higher up the tree, it's going to turn more of like an orange. And I want to kill some more of this pink up in the tree here because that's not quite accurate. But keeping the warm glow that's there. And then this house I went back and forth with. I practiced this view yesterday, and I really like the look of this house, keeping it warm, like even just as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
I love it looks like that's catching glow from this lamp.
Right.
And I really like the look of it, but it makes it look like that house is a lot closer than it is. You know, it's actually a little further back down the hill, and it's catching the highlight off of some blue light around the corner. So I actually am going to paint it the color that I see in the photo, which will also help to localize this light, because everything, once you decide what your focal point is going to be or what the main source of light is, you don't want to fight that too much.
Right. Only one
you know,
star of the show.
exactly. So I'll drop some blue in here. This will probably get a little lighter. And this is also opera pink, turquoise, a little bit of ultramarine, and white. And there's some blue highlight off that driveway coming up there. Another cool thing like that looks really neat, and I didn't really intend for that green to be drug into it, but I think I like it. When you drag your finger around, it's just it kind of has a similar effect to like using a blending stump with pencils, you know. It just looks neat. You can drag the color out there, and it helps soften the edge and blend it off into whatever's behind it.
We've got about 10 minutes.
Awesome. All right. So now that I've put in the highlight of my light here, nothing is going to be quite as bright as that. So I'm going to drop in some more suggestions of these city lights now, because there's a lot more color out there than what's here. I see pinks and yellows and even turquoise out there. So again, same brush, Still the 3/4 inch flat. Super thick paint. I'm not mixing any water in. And white. So this is, so you can see what I'm doing here. Lemon yellow, a little bit of opera pink, and white. Super, super thick, not even touching the water. And I'm just going to drag this across the top really, really lightly. It's even too much paint there. And then when you, the combination of this with some of that underpainting showing through, it just makes those lights pop. And then as we get further into the distance, they get a little more pink. Usually for these lights, I just make a mess of dry brush strokes and then come back in with that blue and paint over top of it to clean it up. And I'm going to drop some turquoise in there too.
I like that turquoise.
It's awesome. And it just, you know, because we've got so much warm happening here, the turquoise helps to balance that out. Because the pink sometimes with these nocturne scenes, you go too heavy on the purple and the orange. It looks awesome. I love that color pair, but maybe it's just a personal preference of mine lately. It's been getting on my nerves. It looks like way too saturated. But that could just be me. So that's why I've been trying to go more yellow, blue than orange and purple. Inevitably, it always ends up orange and purple, though.
They go well together.
Yeah, they do. It's a great color pair. Drop in some of this tree back here. And these trees, because we're getting away from the light, I'm not mixing any ochre or alizarin into them. Although that's probably a little too blue. You can see how deliberate I'm being too with where I'm placing each brush stroke. You don't want to, you know, cover a whole big area with the same
Right.
color or the
Yep.
same.
Somebody noticed that in the chat that you're very deliberate with your brush strokes.
Yeah. Because I used to, you know, if this was the old me painting these palm trees and all these trees back here, I would just get that color on my brush and paint the same color all throughout. And it just doesn't read well. It looks flat. So in between every stroke, like I'll just make a pile of dirty color like this. And in between each stroke, I'm just adding a little bit of literally every single color at this point. And in between every couple of strokes, just mixing something else into there to mix it up. Put a little more Prussian blue for these palm trees over here. Get away from the light. And then the other thing, so palm trees too, I get asked a lot about painting palm trees because they're really tough to suggest.
Yeah.
They're tough. These are a little easier because they're so far away that you can just, the trick to painting palm trees believably is just to not paint a palm tree as we understand it. You just have to squint and paint the shape. You know, a lot of times they just end up looking like lollipops. But you know, if when you're painting plein air, that's all you need. If this was larger, if this was a larger paper, I would maybe go in and do some dry brush like flecks like that to suggest, you know, the leaves.
Yeah.
But I just don't think you need it for this. I'm going to put a little highlight in for the street light back here on the side of the leaves there. The other cool thing that can happen too, that just happened here, because that shadow that I had laid in was still wet, when I put the dry brush on top, it makes a really, really cool effect that you can kind of see right in here, where, you know, you get a hard edge on this side, but where it dips into the paint that's already wet, it smooths itself out and it blends into what's already there. So that looks really cool. I didn't really intend for that to happen. I didn't realize it was still wet.
Carl asked, if this was a rainy night scene, would there be light streaks coming off the light post?
Light streaks coming off the light post. Like,
yeah, what would
like,
change if this was a wet nocturne?
if this was wet, I would do this. The street would be painted entirely transparently, and I would do vertical brush strokes like this to suggest all of the highlights coming down, all the reflection coming down from here. I'd probably paint all of this first, and then keep the warm underpainting for the street, and then at the end spray it again. Just the street. I would hold my hand up like this, just spray the street, and get super wet paint and drop in all the reflections of these colors up here, like that. Is a neat way to suggest water or reflections on a shiny surface. I did a painting a while ago of like it was a restaurant scene, and it was looking down at the bar top, so you weren't getting anything else in the view other than the bar top, just reflecting the lights from TVs and the lights behind the liquor cases behind the bar.
Yeah.
And I found that that's a really cool way to suggest that. You want to keep it wet. You want to spray it even as you're doing it, like spraying it. I've done some of the LA River too, where if the water's still, to get that reflection, you just spray it and do some streaky brush strokes. It looks really, really cool. I don't paint rain all that often though. We don't get very much of it here.
Yeah, that is very true.
I do like the look of a wet street scene though. Like especially some of those like a New York street scene, you know.
Especially with all the tail lights and everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So this back here, like all these leaves and stuff, this is on my brush right now is a little bit of raw sienna and opera pink. Your eye, if we were looking at this in person, your eye doesn't see the glow. The one benefit of painting nocturnes from photos is that you see the glow from that light. If you were in person, this is a lot harder to see. But so that's the benefit of painting from the studio too. I've heard some people say that, you know, the best way to learn is to paint plein air, which I agree with, but you got to do some studio work too, because this is something that I picked up from just painting in the studio off of photos.
Right.
And then when you get in person and you see it, you're like, oh, I know that there's, you know, that this light is sort of glowing a little bit more. So now I know how to suggest that, because if you were only looking at it in person, sometimes that's hard to see. So I might not be able to totally finish this thing completely, but
okay. Once you do finish it, just send us a picture and Amandine will post it on the chat for everyone so they can see the final.
But this is, hopefully I've gotten the idea across of how to paint these lights. It's just working back and forth from those transparent layers to more thick paint. I'm gonna do some darker highlights up in the tree here. And all of this, like everything that you see here, you know, is from the underpainting that has just been preserved, because you get the white of the page showing through. You're not going to get that if you try and go in with the thick paint. Only thick paint. Because you can't get a very dark with gouache. Even if you just go black, like we talked about, it's just too muddy. It doesn't look good.
Yeah, it stands out too much.
Yeah. I don't use black at all. It's not even on my palette. I wouldn't even I don't use it anymore.
I've used the Purline black because it's got more of a gray undertone, so I'll use that sometimes if I need to get like a really, really dark.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's burnt umber.
Burnt umber with oils or with pastels or with
No,
gouache?
with gouache, that's what I've used. That's the
Really?
dark burnt umber, and then see, the Prussian blue are the two dark ones that I have. Oh man,
Yeah.
those trees look great.
The what?
The trees look great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Palm tree stems have to come in after the lights behind, obviously. I've made this mistake plein air a couple of times, just not thinking about it, where I've put in the stems and then done the lights behind, and then I'll just forget to do the stems again, and then I'll bring it back to the studio and I'm like, oh, that looks weird.
Yeah.
All the lights over top of these. I even like the look. Like I was gonna go and put more blue in the background here, and maybe I will, because like that right there is a little intense, that orange back there. But I think it reads pretty well, and I like to exaggerate the city lights a little bit, because in real life on this hill you're only getting just a hint of them. You can't really see them all that well. This is the very last brush I use. I think this is just a 1/2 inch flat, which is pretty much the smallest I'll use. And this is at the very end how I drop in some details, because the 1/4 inch flat is not thin enough to get those lines there.
Yeah.
Just suggest this wall here. The other thing is you want to, for a nocturne like this, kind of suggest like a vignette effect.
Yeah.
So even like I would go in and darken. This is all still a little too warm around the edge. As we get away from the light, I want it to get cooler.
Mhm.
So around the edge, I'm just mixing Prussian, a little bit of ultra or alizarin crimson, and wetting it down and dropping this in like that. And as it's wet, it'll, you can kind of get a little bit of like a glazing effect.
Yeah. Well, while he finishes up those little touches on his painting, the one thing I want to share with you guys, if you didn't listen at the beginning, is Danny is actually going to be on our faculty for Gouache Live coming up August 23rd. Super excited about it. We're going to have Scott Christensen, Danny, we're going to have Tiffany Mang, Judd Mercer, Angela Sung, and Michelle Usabelli. All of these are fantastic gouache artists. So I'm super excited. It's such a great lineup. It's going to be a fantastic day. Super excited for that. And then the other thing, I don't have a slide for it yet. July 23rd, though, mark your calendars, July 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, we are going to do a webinar for gouache. What is gouache, how it differs from acrylic and watercolor, just kind of a beginner, this is what it is kind of a thing. We're going to have an artist with Blick Art Materials who's going to run that with us. And then I'll be hosting along with Sarah, our materials manager. So that's going to be a really fun time. So mark your calendars for that. And hopefully I'll have a slide for you by the end of the week. But definitely sign up for Gouache Live. And don't forget to check out Danny's website, and his Instagram handle is there. We definitely want you to check out his stuff. He's got so much good work. Also, the other thing I have to say at the very end, I've got to find the slide since Amandoon's not here, is subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. That way you get notified when we go live. We're weekdays, 12 noon Eastern on YouTube. You can also watch us on Facebook. We've got various pages we broadcast to. So always check us out. Thank you again to Danny for sharing his gouache nocturne with us today. That was an awesome painting, watching that come to life. And I will see you guys all tomorrow for another fantastic show. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for having me.